Team, welcome back. It's so good to have us all here, and today we're going to be talking about something that's been on a lot of young people's minds, and that's unemployment. Because you see, for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of economic turbulence. We all just came out of the pandemic. We've all seen how different companies, different employers have been reacting to the situation. But this presents a very unique opportunity for us to really think about how to solve this challenge, because we've all been there. We've all submitted the resumes, put hundreds of applications together, and it's exhausting, especially when you're ghosted by HR, when your application doesn't go through, and I gotta tell you, the worst pet peeve of mine especially is when you're trying to kind of like put all your work experience and the stupid platform doesn't just kind of like take it in on its own, and it's kind of like, why am I having to duplicate my resume and submit my resume? It's nonsense. Long story short, we have seen all of this accumulate into a horrible crisis for young people everywhere. And it's an issue. So how are we going to fix it? How are we going to address it? That is what we are here to talk about. Welcome back to Point of Inquiry, a show hosted by Engage. So team, think back to your first job. What did it take to get there, and how did it help you get to where you are?
My first job was actually working as an aquatic instructor. I had to work hard to get that job because I had to complete all of the certifications leading up to an aquatic instructor, and I also needed to pass that certification and all of those things before I could start working. But I think that that was a really good opportunity for me to just jump into the workforce. So I started working when I was 16. And yeah, I think that was a really good opportunity and a good start, I guess, into the workforce.
That's fantastic. But it wasn't until my teens, I was in high school, that's kind of when I started to make a little bit of pocket money. And I don't remember what grade I was in, but I was translating letters back home. And I had to make sure that obviously the translation was on point because I was translating from Spanish for kids in the Amazon, talking to their either foster or adoptive or sponsor parents. Solange, Bika, where did you guys start?
My first actual was at A&W, and it wasn't just any A&W, it was A&W in the mall, and I was one of the back staff, not even the front facing staff. I mean, it taught me work ethic in some sense, I guess. I met a lot of great friends from it, kind of. So
my first job, it was working as a community advisor at the at York University. That was my very first job. There I was helping international student orientation, all of those stuff. And because I'd never worked before, I never understood what constitute a good work ethics, being on time in office and all of those. I was so careless with that, and I got called to the manager's office 5 to 7 times. Discipline, Mikhail, you need to be punctual. Oh, what are you doing here? So that kind of from a very careless Mikhail to a more disciplined person that I am right now.
We were scrappy, we worked hard, we were able to get a job, and that job led to another, whether at the mall, whether after school, whether at the pool. But we all got that job, and eventually it opened so many doors to us. And I think that that's kind of the problem that we're facing right now, that a lot of youth are facing right now, because for the most part, the recessionary struggle that we're really seeing, it's very alarming. And I think that's one of the problems that we're facing right now is we'll divide it into 2 categories, and I'll put the graph up on the screen. If you take a look at youth, both 15 to 24, and then you look at 24 to 54, right? So people both kind of mid to late stages in their careers, you're going to see a lot of very alarming figures. To start, we've actually seen a horrible unemployment rate jump, specifically a jump of 5.5%. That's huge. And I feel like what's really hurting us, and especially younger cohorts right now, is that all of this happened in a very short time span, right? So we were kind of seeing that, looking at this 14.6% figure, it really only took place in 15 years. That's a high schooler, right? So imagine you're born, you're taught, you are ready, you're full of hope, and then you're just about to, you're gonna get your license, you're practicing to get your license, maybe to even drive to work, and you can't do it. Where are you gonna go, right? You're gonna be stuck at home, you can't afford the car, you can't pay for gas. you're stunted. Your growth is stunted. And as a young person, that sucks, man. That's horrible.
This is something that you see in the economy years later, right? 15 to 24 is the beginning of a career. Not, realistically, the beginning of a career. Obviously, you can have your first job at 15, 16 years old, and you're maybe working at a fast food place or at a pool, but you don't that's where your career starts. That's where you learn your discipline. And some people even have jobs that start at the age of 16, 17, 18 and progress into their careers. And right now, like, the economy is not going to get affected by it. There is an issue of unemployment, but there's still lots of jobs that exist, and there's a lot less unemployment in the older ages. But what we're going to see is way later down the line, all of these people who didn't get the opportunity to have a job experience early on to set themselves up at the stage that you should, that's when it's going to start delaying the effects, and that's real dangerous.
The job market has evolved so much that they do not refer to transcripts as much as they would before. I think work-related experiences.
On average, there's a higher level. A lot more people than before are not just in education, have had higher education, a master's degree. More people have master's degrees, or it's more common to, I should say, than it's ever been. And I feel like as a result of that, it's expected that when you have the work experience, that you come from a higher level of education. You have a lot of that. And this is, of course, not universally true, but it's something that I think the expectation has changed for someone who is in the workforce.
I think something else you said that stood out to me was transcripts. And I feel like jobs, they never look at grades at all. But for some reason, like, I don't know why, but like when we were in school, like, I was under the impression that like maybe they would look at grades. But like, I don't think they asked for that. They care for that at all. And I don't know where that misinformation came from.
For a couple of reasons. And I think that especially as we bring the focus back to employment, it's really about two things, right? So on the topic that you brought up, Solange, about people being the most educated than they've ever been, it's one of those things that if you do want to pursue further education to open more doors, you're going to have to get good transcripts. Otherwise, the application is going to suffer, right? The grades that you bring into the application play a tremendous role in being able to go into higher education. And on the other hand, if you're looking to get that experiential education, to Mikhail's points, it's really a matter of being able to apply for co-ops, right? And get experience as you're going through the learning process. But uniquely, co-ops, it's maybe to a lesser degree internships, but certainly co-ops, they are weight, right? So the grades also play a role in helping you get your foot in the door. Because again, they have that direct academic components associated to it coming from a university. So grades don't matter. They're not the end all be all. But kids that are listening, get good grades. They open so many doors.
Job market is ever evolving, and there's opportunities for everyone, except for right now when unemployment is low.
That's the challenge. And it's crazy because we're kind of seeing that across the board, right? And so across North America, to be very specific. And what Canadian doesn't dream of, getting a good job in the States. I feel like that's the Canadian dream, to be frank. It's not a white picket fence and like a wife and a dog. It's how quickly can I go to the US, sell out, and make six figures at like 22? That's what every young person has on their mind.
No, I don't think
so. Okay, listen,
go to
guys,
the US. No,
you're gonna pull us.
I think that's changed in recent years. I think that has definitely changed. Yeah,
especially with the recent political climate there.
There's one other point to mention. How the career. I know the volatile political climate, and as well as the most crucial part, all of us university students that we go to school, and most of the time, many of us are unaware of the career service counseling, and I think this is where the career services in university could do a better job in making the students more aware that these opportunities exist, and really put a lot of emphasis on the students to their education, career pathways. What should you do to prepare for that 2 years before graduation? Because when you're graduating and then post-graduation, it's a very volatile, fragile market. It's a saturated market right now, and that can be a real impediment, your lack of awareness of not doing your research in
It's
advance.
It's interesting that you say this too, because I feel like every single university has a career center, but
Mhm.
like for some reason they don't feel very helpful. So I wonder if like maybe they should change up their tactics in terms of how they are supporting young people to get jobs and university. Because yeah, I think they rely too much on us kind of to like go to them instead of like them coming to us with like the resources and the information that we need to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bring back career fairs.
Do you guys remember SMA3? It was this funding scheme that he proposed a couple years ago, and it was essentially tied university funding to the amount of jobs, well, to a couple of things, to the amount of jobs that graduates got, to the salaries that they made, et cetera, like to the applicability and the relevance of that job to their degree, et cetera, right? All things that universities should be assessed on. So heads in the right place there. But I think more importantly, it has to be really tied into the curriculum. And
But I think that's actually on the right path though, because in theory, we want the government who in a public university, it's funded by the government. You want the government to have a more of a partnership with universities. Similar like when you have like a co-op program, the government has a joint, if you will, like an agreement with different like organizations, with the government, with private sector companies, all these different things. They have like agreements where it's like, yeah, we're gonna be looking at hiring one of your students. So they need, if anything, there needs to be more support into having programs like that, something that creates like a relationship with different organizations, different companies in these universities. You don't necessarily need to hire them right at the gate, but building a relationship so these students can kind of get an idea of what's waiting for them, you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say like there was a business school that brought in like the big four accounting firms, like the talent people to their school for like the students to be able to speak to talent people. They can also do like university students can do internships with the summer throughout the year with these companies as well. And I think we need more of those opportunities, like for other like liberal arts degrees as well. Because like I think it's a good way for you to start building those connections earlier on before you actually jump into the job force.
You know, liberal arts kids are running the world, for better or for worse. And the biggest problem is that they aren't being given the business school treatments, and it sucks. Graduating with these great degrees, and I will die on this hill, they are great degrees, but they aren't, the skills that we are learning aren't, one, fully marketable, two, fully adaptable, and three, on a disciplinary level, we're not really taught to monetize. And I feel like that's really what's holding us back. So it isn't so much the discipline that sucks, it's that we're not being well-rounded enough at the university.
And interestingly, to add it back onto it being like a thing that should be cared about, even on a government level, Canada has an issue of brain drain. For context, brain drain being like really high education happens in Canada. A lot of people get highly educated and they leave. And this is for both Canadians and international students who come in. And this is a serious thing because we have so many great universities and so many great Canadians who come in here and they gain this wonderful experience, this great whatever, but we don't keep them. We don't, and it's not even that the jobs, I mean, right now is a different case, but prior it wasn't even that jobs didn't exist. We just have a hard time retaining our skilled labor. And so you'd think now more than ever, that's something that should be taken a bit more seriously.
Totally agree with you, Sol, on that point. You know, going back to the university question, local student and international student. So specifically speaking about international student in this case, which I think there should be a service from university. Like international student comes from different demographic background, culturally different, and they have different expectations. And I think it is very important for university to set that expectation. Their expectation is it to high, just level the playing field. Because I know many international students, they mostly focus on the thing that they do step 1, 2, 3, and that will lead them to a successful career, which is to the contrary, not true at all. There is a system in Canada where things are being done here, and I think there is a real need for that awareness to these students so that they do not see a block or a wall by the time they graduate. it's very important that cultural communication, understanding Canadian culture, and level the playing field with international and their culture.
I wanted to say something hot topic, but I don't know if I should say it. Obviously, a lot of Canadians are not very happy with a lot of immigrants because they feel like they are taking job opportunities away from them. I feel like we're hearing very frequently because of all of these unemployment, especially young people are like, well, I'm not getting a job because these immigrants are coming in and taking away these opportunities from us.
I think it's a double-edged sword. People always love having someone to blame. Everyone loves having someone to blame. And while yes, more people around makes it in theory harder to get a job, but there's also not, at least not prior to everything happening right now, it was never an issue of a scarcity of jobs. So I do think people tend to fall on the if something doesn't go your way, you need someone to blame, and it's very easy to find a certain demographic to point your finger at.
Scapegoat is the word you're looking for so much. Perfect scapegoat,
No, and it's so true because like if we look at some of the causes of unemployment, I mean, on the one hand, the numbers paint a very unfortunate but also a very clear story, and it's true. Competition has played such a big role in preventing youth from really being able to get the opportunities that they deserve. And I think that part of the problem, as we look a bit further into this, is exactly what happened during the pandemic. Because as the world shut down for about 3 years, businesses were looking for what came next. People died, people lost their jobs, people didn't want to go back to work. All of these things were true. And in Canada, we have a very terrible history and very lazy political history of relying on immigrants for filling labor gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's highly exploitative, it's lazy, like I said, and it's highly ineffective, very detrimental also to our economy and the future of our youth, because we're essentially letting companies replace us. And I feel like that's the part of the conversation that everybody misses. Thankfully, this year, specifically this year, it has become more mainstream. And you hear not only people on social media, but now every now and then a good CBC article, a good even National Post article, I'll see if I could find that one specifically, talk about the fact that there is so much exploitation in the temporary foreign worker system that's allowing companies to say, we don't want the youth, we want a guy that we can pay significantly less because guess what? He doesn't really have a choice. He's being exploited by his landlord. He's being price gouged by the grocers. We could probably pay him less too. And because we're his only source of employment, looking at these numbers, like these numbers are truly mind-boggling. And I feel like that's something that can really help put it in context for people. So let's take a look at what happened. If we see the pandemic, January 2022, January 2024, so just 2 years, total labor force expanded by 2.2%. Not too bad. Total employment grew 1.8%. So already we're seeing a bit of an equilibrium, or a disequilibrium, I should say. We have more people in the workforce, but we don't really have a lot of jobs that are keeping pace. Now, why is this happening? Well, to contextualize further, we have about, in this time period, 200,000 extra jobs or extra people, additional job seekers that simply can't find a job anywhere. And the problem that this poses is obviously one that's very familiar to youth today. People can't get work. The challenge was that the IRCC allowed so many newcomers in, thinking that this was what's going to jumpstart the economy. And at a specific level, we're seeing that, residence admissions went from 341,000 in 2020 to 405,000 in 22, and then 432,000 in 2023. Like, that's huge. That's an explosion of people. And, that surge overall, like you added up over all the years, eventually totaled 800,000 new job seekers.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, talk about a jump. We went from 200 to 800. Whoa, horrible, horrible jumps. Now, to be clear, because I'm sure that a lot of people are going to want to clip this and say, oh, well, look, the Engage Foundation doesn't like immigrants. I mean, at the end of the day, no, it's not an immigration problem. At the end of the day, it's the fact that the IRCC
Policy problem.
Didn't have a good policy in place.
Mm-hmm.
Plain and simple. They let us be replaced. It is a government-created problem.
Whenever I talk to any of my friends about this, because an immigration conversation is always fun to have with an immigrant economist, it's time. And what I always say is I think of it as kind of like an adopting a kid. Canada is making up a policy where it decides that they want to adopt kids. You need to make sure that you can feed all of your kids. You need to make sure that you can house all of your kids. And that's really what it comes down to. Why some of the kids are coming can be for reasons of, I just want to go there to get some school and then immediately get a job. And some of them could go for reasons of, I'm trying to escape my war-torn country. All reasons are valid reasons for immigrating. There shouldn't be a big reason. Immigration is a wonderful thing. And that is something that as a people and a people thing to do, great, fantastic. Never a people's problem. If people are moving because they are under the assumption that the government has created this policy, there's room for us. There's a thriving economy for us. We're here to help contribute to it and become new Canadians. Then naturally, that's what they're going to do. So the problem really becomes, why do we have so many kids in a house that has one room with nowhere to go and no food on the table? What happened?
And so it's become absurd. It's become insane. But it's so interesting that you mentioned that topic about schooling, because it's true. I mean, like, one of the biggest things that governments, both provincial and federal, were really relying on pre-pandemic, inter-pandemic, and post-pandemic was taking advantage of international students to pay ridiculous tuition, because they wanted to stop paying for education. And they were like, well, if we're underfunding education, let's get foreigners to pay more, make up our shortfall. And over the pandemic, the numbers are crazy. So we went for permit holders, this is just study permit holders, 2019, 638,000, right? A little over 500,000, to well over 1 million. Just in 2023, we had 1,028,000. Huge. It practically doubled in the course of 4 years. So literally one academic term, boom, gone, double. You look at that and you ask yourself, well, first of all, what are we going to do with so many students? I mean, sure, I guess heyday for the universities, but realistically, it doesn't really help the nation, because to Solange's point, how are you going to take care of the kids when you don't have enough money to go around the kids that are already there, right? That's, I feel like there's so much that we overlooked. You know, we kind of like really fixated, much like the Canadian public and the Canadian government, on the challenges that come with immigration. But I also feel like, you know, there's so many other economic factors that played a huge role. You know, one of the biggest ones is Trump's tariffs. Like, we were right there. Everybody was like, soft landing during the pandemic. We're gonna make it work. And we were gonna make it work until, you know, the big orange guy was like, let's close down economies, let's ruin trade relationships, and let's not let people get employed, because all of these companies are putting their expansion plans on hold, or putting their acquisitions on hold, or putting hiring on hold, because they don't know what tomorrow is going to look like, all because of these tariffs. And that is such a calamity that goes well beyond any type of economic impact, negative economic impact, that immigrants can make.
And poor recovery from the pandemic. Like, that was something that I remember. We were in the midst of the pandemic, and as things were slowly looking like, you know, light at the end of the tunnel, I remember thinking, oh my God, our economy is never going to recover from this. And I remember studying this and thinking, there's going to be a point in time where everyone thinks things are better. And I know that behind the scenes, it's going to be like trying to undo Christmas lights. And it feels like we were in the middle of undoing Christmas lights. And that's what a lot was happening prior to tariffs. Everything was like, people were like, wow, this really sucks. And it was, a lot of policies were not handled properly. A lot of things weren't handled properly. God knows that one of the very first things that came out of the pandemic was, hey, let's privatize medical care, as if we learned nothing from the pandemic at all. So stuff like that was unraveling the Christmas lights, and then tariffs came in, and everything, all of the complexities that came with Trump being reelected was very much like, now we have Christmas lights, and now you're undoing them in the dark. You can't plug them in, by the way. You're in the dark. You're trying to undo them, and also you don't have hands. You have your hands behind your back. Undo them with your teeth. Good luck. And it feels like that's very much the case that we're in. We're already at we were at a very like volatile place in the economy, and now it's worse.
Yeah, literally. But fun fact, you know, on the topic of privatization of healthcare, Canada used to have a world-class vaccine lab. You know, we were pioneers in this technology. Then came Brian Mulroney, a former prime minister. He decided to sell it off. And guess who needed vaccines in the 20s? We did. So,
you think we learned from our lessons ever?
I think so, but I'm not optimistic. Mikhail's very optimistic. Mikhail, your analysis at the start of this episode was awesome.
Oh, wow.
Curious to know if your economic outlook is as gloomy as ours, or do you see the light at the end of the tunnel?
You mean there's always light at the end of the tunnel. There always will be, even though the chances look very green right now. The perfect example how Solange put about the Christmas lights. Now you have no hands, you cannot plug it in. If you do not have hands anymore and you can't plug in your Christmas lights, the next step is investing in yourself. You have to really push yourself out of your comfort zone. So what can we do now? Many initiatives, like for example, entrepreneurial ideas, many youth, the young people within Canada has taken the entrepreneurial route, coming up with very creative ideas, business initiative that has never been taught before. Imagine if there was no tariff, this kind of pushing out of comfort zone will not be incentivized as much. But now, because you're being constrained, when you have to survive, you will work your ass off to get. Same thing applies to Canada. I think Canada is on that path right now. Beautiful ideas, beautiful initiatives. All the government have to do is to invest in the right people. Who knows, Canada may be one of the most strongest G7 country.
It's so I feel like we're finally kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And I really like the way that you were putting it, Mikhail, because it's true. When you invest in the right people, you're able to accomplish some phenomenal things.
Mhm.
And I think that's where we really have to focus our energies, especially as young people, because, we were fortunate enough to really kind of like eke out of it. Like we barely eked out. I think we all graduated just at the right time to be able to get out of this crisis. But,
Yeah.
we're looking back and we're trying to create opportunities. I mean, Engage itself, like we've been able to employ youth in our short existence, and it's been awesome to be able to kind of like help back and actually pay people to do great work. But we want the governments to really take charge and say, this is a problem, here's how we're going to address it. So here's how the government should address it. Let's start with our favorite topic, government spending. I feel like that's such a big point for us to consider, because if we look beyond Canada to countries that have done a much better job of taking care of their youth and actually giving them a future, I think one of the biggest things for us to consider is publicly funded pathways. Huge thing. What's the goal there? I think the goal for us and the goal for this type of programming is to provide an immediate safety net and structured entry points for unemployed youth, so that nobody's left behind, so that nobody is left in a neat position, an EET, not an education, employment, or training. The EU Youth Guarantee does such a good job, because if you think about it, 4 months after graduation, you're still super fresh, you're still super young, you're not very employable, you just have a degree. They make sure that they're able to provide on-the-job training, apprenticeships, internships. Well, I use the word internship loosely, but essentially formal training, a very short time span after graduating. And it works so well. It's been able to effectively reduce youth unemployment from 23.4% in 2013, almost in half, plus or minus a couple of percentage points, to 14.9% in 2019. That is insane. And if you look at Spain, Spain's not exactly known for having a very strong economy, and neither is Italy on that end too. But collectively, individually, these countries, through the EU Youth Guarantee, have been able to reduce their youth unemployment by 38% and 30%, respectively. That's insane. Guys, that's all our current youth unemployment rates that they've been able to accomplish. What? Those are huge cuts, all because the government's invested in the right people. Can you believe it?
Okay, on this note as well of like investing in the right people, I think a lot of young people are coming out of university now with AI playing a really big factor and role. And there are some companies that are actually removing a lot of people from different roles because AI can do the job instead. So I guess like, what are your thoughts in terms of like that shift? Because I think that's also now providing a bit of an obstacle for a lot of youth to be able to get a job.
Well, that's investment in the wrong people.
I think like all things, AI should be government regulated. And AI is huge. Obviously, we know that. But also when the World Wide Web, the WWW was introduced, that was a huge shift as well. And like anything, I think it's going to create and require a shift of people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it may not be more than would be expected. But I feel like a lot of the time we have the idea that when things happen in the economy, this is the first time it's ever happened. We are the only ones who've ever experienced these things. But I think it's the shifts, like things like this that create shifts in a job market that changes things. It requires a shift as well. And I don't think that AI is going to be replacing every single job the way that a lot of people are very concerned that it might. I think it requires like growing pains. It requires a shift, but I don't think it's as about to take over as we think.
I am aligned with what Solange mentioned. As an extension, I think the introduction of AI in almost all aspects of life, we're seeing in university, we're seeing in job, everywhere, in marketplaces, cashiers replaced by robots, even courier service as well, replaced by robot as well. I just was walking down the streets of Toronto and I see this robotic machine running down the footpath and throwing envelopes into the door.
Yeah. I always think about, and this is especially true because I always talk to my parents about this because obviously we're from Cuba. We have like, you see, things happened a little bit later. So when my parents moved here, they saw a big change in things and technology. My parents are like, they're technology people. So for them, it was from a slightly different perspective, but you look around and you see in the same way that like a lot of like baby boomers and Gen X were like, oh, the youth are always tied to their phone now or whatever, because like that was something that wasn't around. And the same thing goes for us when we're like, the youth are always asking AI for therapy. So like, that's not necessarily to say that AI won't have socioeconomic effects. Like that is a whole other conversation. That is a whole other talk show episode as to the effects of AI on that scale. But I think when it comes to unemployment or jobs, I think it's like it's like a stretching of the muscle. Like things are going to have to change, but I don't think it's going to be the end all.
I just wanted to quickly, AI as a significant contributing factor for unemployment. My response would be not exactly, no, because when there's a crisis, you can turn that into an opportunity. AI is exactly that.
Yeah, and I think that it's a very good way of putting it, because a lot of people look at this argument and they say, oh God, these stupid Luddites, they're not intelligent enough to accept the supremacy of AI and the way that it's going to usher us into the new age of work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's so stupid because at the same time, we're also seeing, like pretty much unfolding in front of us during our lifetimes, not even that long ago, the way in which it's not artificial intelligence exclusively, but automation and now AI have been taking jobs away. Right. And that plays such a big role in preventing youth from being able to get that head start. Not even the head start, like literally just the entry point, the foot in the door to be able to get the jobs that they need. And you see that so clearly across retail and hospitality, right? You see it at the self-checkout, you see it at the front line, you see that in terms of kind of like posting for additional roles, because all of a sudden, guess what? You don't need so many people there at the register. You just need maybe one person to stock the shelves and to work the register and to clean the floor. And all of a sudden you have all these quote unquote labor saving technologies that are replacing people.
This is like my point. This is like, that's proof of a healthy economy. In a sense, you are able to gain the same amount of profit with less labor, and you're able to, productivity is increased, which don't even get me started on productivity versus wage and all that. But that, if anything, that should give you the opportunity for opening up another branch, which gives you another opportunity for more jobs. And you need people to manage this. And then you need it. This, if anything, should, if regulated properly, and if there's proper government incentives, it should, in theory, make things more productive, which should open up opportunities. It should open up more opportunities for things. It makes us not just more productive, but more innovative in new ways. And what is that supposed to do? In theory, it's supposed to have more opportunities for people. It's supposed to open up different pathways. And that's definitely a disconnect that we're seeing. And I think there's obvious reasons, or not obvious, but there's definitely reasons for it.
Now, see, this is the tricky business, because at the end of the day, we have to, and back to Solange, right? Your favorite point, good government regulation. We got to make sure that's embedded into the AI New Deal, because we're really
agree, so hard agree.
No, 1,000%, because right now what we're seeing is that these companies are pretty much treating the gap in policy and public consensus on AI replacements and saying, well, people lost their jobs, more profit for me, they've washed their hands. So there's no incentive for that expansion, which, as we've assumed is going to come with an increase of employment. What really needs to happen is two things on this front. As we continue to see AI displace, and automation, to be clear, because it isn't ChatGPT that's taking jobs, it's really automated systems that are taking jobs, and robots. We need to see two things. On the one hand, we need to see a stronger tax on profits, so that we can redistribute wealth more fairly, more equitably to the people that are affected the most, right? If you're laid off because you have a robot coworker that is doing your job, you were cleaning floors, great. Guess what? Now you have like a RoboVac doing the same thing.
But like,
You got it. There has to be a wealth tax on that. There has to be, because what are we doing? Like, you and I are paying taxes to cover that displacement, and we had nothing to do with it. No, the company needs to pay. Over to you.
I know, I was just gonna say, like, it's just funny because, like, what are they gonna do if the robot doesn't do the work properly? Like, are gonna be like,
then you hire him back.
like, no, like, then you're gonna want to hire actual people to do the work because the AI didn't do it properly.
No, which frankly is
and the thing is, we're at the beginning. We're at the beginning of this movement of automation and AI to the degree that it's at. So we're going in the way that I imagined a lot of baby boomers went into when the internet was introduced, which was panic, fear, and oh my God, worst case scenarios. And I do think it's kind of, we literally just discussed that self-regulating doesn't work, but it's almost a way of self-regulating. You learn lessons and you see that it's not so severe. But like when I think about it, like what can we do in this front besides like beg and hope and plead for more government regulation in that regard? But we have there's a whole new sector of the government, a new department that should that could create, not only does that create jobs, but that could be created in the sense of managing and understanding artificial intelligence and its role within an economy, its role within a society, realistically, because it's basically its own member now. But that also gets me thinking about how much, if as individuals, as Canadians, what we need to be doing is a push for, especially in the state that we're in right now, is government policies, the very specific kind of government policies, ones that are not just like socioeconomic ones, like we're looking at unemployment, or technically it's employment insurance, EI, not just unemployment, but specifically like we're looking at the amount of government regulative policies and departments that could exist that help youth get jobs, that are created to create these interpersonal relationships. And that's not even looking at like what's it called? ESD? Something like that. So like there's so much that we could be at, that we can continually ask for the government, from the government, that is helping build up better foundation for not just youth, but in general, to avoid these types of issues.
Yeah. I think the other thing, like moving a little bit away from like AI, is that I think in the job market, we are a little bit picky, in the sense that like people don't want to go back in person to work. Like if they can work hybrid or remote.
True, but that's also a double-edged sword, because we could also, we've proven we can do so many jobs remote. So there should be so many jobs that can exist remote. And you're closing the labor market by narrowing it down to, no, you have to come in 4 days a week just because we already paid rent on the building. Sorry, you got to come in.
I know.
Exactly.
It's a very questionable decision. And I think that, at the end of the day, we have to understand that we're people first. So we really have to be able to build a society that works for us. And I think that's part of building that ideal society is two things. People don't want technology, automation, AI to do the writing, the art. They wanted to do their dishes and their laundry. That is the role of AI.
If it was on an episode of the Jetsons or something to that equivalent, then it's allowed to be existing as AI or automation.
Yes, also acceptable. But I bring this up for one simple reason, and that is, as we think about the kind of society that we want to build, we always have to ask ourselves, well, forget what the companies are saying, forget what the government has settled on. What actually works for us? And I think that the biggest thing that we've uncovered is that counter-cyclical spending and, very importantly, investing in the right people are the paths forward. But there's still something we haven't considered yet. And that is, how do we get employers to sign on? And we see a case in Australia about this, is adding incentives, financial incentives, government-backed incentives that can fund youth to go to a job. Money comes into the business, youth get the experience, win.
What is the risk that comes with being young? You have a lot of energy, you don't know where to put it. You have all of the brain power, but you don't know how to use it. You don't have the experience, but you have the hopes, goals, and dreams. And no one really wants to be the one that shapes. And it's been said a lot of the times that companies want young people at the beginning of their career because there's no one better. You can shape them into your perfect little corporate robot. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. But then it's also complicated because no one also really wants to invest in that shaping, that building. It takes time and it's a long-term investment. But we're kind of at a point right now where no one really wants the long-term investment. They want reliable. And that's fair because of the state of the economy we're in right now, everyone wants reliable, but no one wants to invest in the inexperience and the risk. It's high risk, high reward. And that's kind of at the point that companies don't really want to deal with.
And like, I think the other thing is, like we young people nowadays also like we tend to, I don't want to say like we like to jump jobs, but like there is just kind of like the stigma right now where like everyone like will find the next opportunity where they can really quickly. So sometimes the employers feel like if they waste their time, they feel like they're wasting their time training these young people like
For them to leave.
Yeah, to perform that role, and then they like leave within the next couple of months. So it's like, what is the point of me wasting my energy training you if you're just gonna leave?
I feel like that's another like that's a thing that Gen Z, I feel like millennials a little bit, but mostly Gen Zs have really brought into the workplace, which is I refuse to work for a toxic work environment.
100%.
And it's kind of adds to AI, like it's a learning curve. People are going to have to adjust to that being the new norm.
It's so interesting. I feel like, look, youth just get such a bad rep when it comes to jobs. And I think that the biggest problem isn't so much laziness or a lack of motivation. I really think the biggest problem is, well, there is no single biggest problem. There are three things. The biggest one being when they graduate, they don't have anywhere to really kind of like channel their efforts. As they're graduating, they don't have enough experience because programs aren't really set up to help them succeed. And once they actually enter the labor market, nobody really wants to take a bet on them because there's no incentive to make that bet and have it actually pay off.
Mm-hmm.
These are three problems that we can fix easily, right? And we can improve the educational system. We can mandate, work experience as part of curricula. And we can start to implement many international examples of job subsidies tied to youth employment parameters. That's awesome. But I think the one thing that we're not considering, which I'm kind of surprised business school over here didn't bring up, is entrepreneurship. Because as I was delving into the literature on this, it kind of blew my mind that, nobody talks about it. But who needs to get a job when you can make a job all by yourself?
Okay, but I feel like when you come out of school, it is so hard to get into that mindset about, I'm going to start my own business.
No,
But also you need money to make money.
Exactly.
On that point, you just reminded me. I think it's very important I cannot stress this enough to the young audience who are listening to this podcast. Listen very carefully. It is very important to have your own circle of mentors. I would call it the board of directors. So a board of directors, what does that mean? That means there is somebody that you trust, an expert in the work that you're looking for. And then it could be your academic mentor. So an expert for your work-related stuff, then a mentor for your other field. For example, if you're playing sports or other interpersonal skills. So for myself, I have for my piano, I've got a piano mentor. For my work, I have a career coach. For my engaged volunteer work, I have wonderful friends like you to take advice. And for my sports running, I have a trainer. And this relationship is very important for you to build. This board of directors, this circle of mentors who can give you a well-informed insight into the path that you're walking towards. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know you're smart and intelligent and brilliant, but you need the experience of people who have already been in the role that you are striving to get to. That will help you avoid the blind spots that falls on the path and make you a well-informed decision that can set you up for success, not for the short term, but for generations to come, your family. So start with your board of directors, circle of mentors.
That circles it back to it. The human element. Everything comes back down to this human element in interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And like fails, you're not able to get a job, then yeah, you could technically start your own job.
Well, yes, and it isn't really a pipe.
I don't think that's everyone's goal though. Not everyone wants to like build their career based off of that though. So that makes it complicated. Like you need support from the government, you need a subsidy, you need reasons for there to be support built in so that people are motivated to do what they want, what they love, and it builds a healthier economy as a consequence. I have so many friends who do not care about building their own business unless it's like a cutesy little bookstore, which I support. I will join in on that one as well. But you know, it's just not. It comes down to it not being everyone's cup of tea.
No, it's true. It's true, yeah. And nobody's going to argue that, you know, like that's the right path forward. But at the same time, I think that that's something that we haven't really given a lot of attention to. And as a result, so many youth are missing out because we all have so many ideas. And I think that in the age of vibe coding, it's become so much easier to bring those ideas to life. But I think what we can really encourage governments to do is help us. Because like think about the way that entrepreneurship works. It's had so much success in other countries. And like the UK is a great example of this, not necessarily as the birthplace of entrepreneurship, but in terms of having a very functional program. So if you look at the Princess Trust Enterprise Training, I think it's the Enterprise program, it does such a good job of helping young people bring their ideas to life. It's like, you know, the Y Incubator. How does it work? In essence, you get microgrants or loans to finance your training, to finance not your training, your development. You get income support so that you're not kind of like, well, eating on ramen doesn't sound terrible now, especially for a young audience, but so that you're not eating ramen packets every single day. And best of all, it offers that mentorship that Mikhail kept talking about. And so it really is the best of all worlds. Now, is that going to fix the youth unemployment crisis? It never will. But it offers such a perfect parallel on-ramp that not only maximizes your earning potential, because it's true, the people that earn most are owners, not workers. And on the other hand, you also get to create so many new jobs. If you big if, but those are tremendous benefits that should be pursued because of the potential behind them.
But also, yeah, I think startups, like for those that want to pursue that entrepreneurship route, which I feel like there are a lot of people in like my circle that would like to pursue, like working at a startup, for an example, is a really good opportunity to like get into that, I guess, that circle, because then you're working with the founder a lot closer, with those that are like a part of the founding board.
And it's a great experience because like so many startups, like whatever role you take, you're doing like 14 different roles in one. You gain so much valuable experience from working hands-on in that.
Exactly. That you're able to kind of like take those learnings from to also start your own company or start your own business.
Yeah, no, and it's so true. It's so true. And I feel like, yes, entrepreneurship as a pathway to employment, and not as a pathway to employment, as a pathway to get out of the unemployment crisis, so valuable, so valuable. So I think that at this point, we've covered it all. We've talked about the crisis. We've talked about the solutions. We've talked about all the fun little tidbits in between. And I think that it's really important for our audience to take away these points. On the one hand, youth unemployment in Canada, we're at 14.6%. We didn't really talk about gender, which is surprising because, you know, we're a very social conscious group. But interestingly enough, men continue to be hit the hardest. And that's not because, you know, men are the victims of the world. It's really because women actually choose to get into employable fields. They like healthcare, they like education. Those fields are very well staffed and have great job opportunities.
Women, I think it's also been really researched because it's a tendency whenever you reach like a bit of a recession for people to go back to school, but it's especially more true for women where usually when like push comes to shove, you think, okay, let me pivot, and then they go back to school. They find a new career field, or in general, they just continue their education in some sort. I think that there's a lot of studies that exist on that, which is quite interesting why it became like a gender specific solution.
Well, you know, psychologically, it's a lot of it's tied to a man's sense of self-worth, because if you lose your job, you know, what are you really going to do? Are you going to go face the family? Or are you going to say, well, I'm going to go back to school with all these kids that are significantly less accomplished than me? Like, you're putting yourself in an environment where, you know, you're surrounded by humiliation. It's one explanation. It's not the explanation, but I can see why it would be so demoralizing. But the solution to that obviously isn't necessarily to, you know, kind of like, it's simply to change the mindset. And it's easier said than done. But yes, the problem is a lot of men exit the workforce when they're unemployed. They're also not going into safe jobs. They're going into risky and well-paying jobs. The other side to the gender pay gap, and that's causing them to lose opportunities. So opportunity to unpack that later. And we kind of see how the gender dynamics are emerging from that. But another thing that's also really important for us to kind of like reiterate here is that there's so much structural mismatch between job growth and the way that our education system is set up. And I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to really chat about that, because it's true, liberal arts run the world. But at the end of the day, it's also such a wasted opportunity for youth, because if they're not able to get a job with these life-changing degrees, then they're not as life-changing as one would hope that they would be. That's an opportunity that's ripe for amendments and solutions. We also talked about some solutions of our own. We talked about our favorite, government spending on youth. When you invest in the right people, it works. Absolutely. We talked about entrepreneurship, parallel on-ramp. If you want to get employed, but you can't get employed, start a business, let the government help out. It works in the UK. And then the other thing, subsidies. Solange's favorite word. We need more.
Almost forgot.
Yes. So that youth can get jobs, and so that employers are willing to take that risk. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel like that sums up our episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.